Hello, this is a response video to Marxist YouTuber Xexizy on the subject of identity politics in the leftist movement. Now I want to make it known right off the bat that I have no problem with Xexizy personally and have been a subscriber of his for over a year. I like him, but I think he's wrong in a very illuminative way here that helps shed light on the modern divisions within the leftist movement. The two videos he has made on this topic have already caused quite a lot of stir about a year ago, and he has since deleted them. Because of this, I will be responding to quotes from the videos that get his general idea across, and not the video themselves. With that said, let's begin. In his old video, Xexizy says the following quotes. There are other times when identity politics would be used to negate anti-capitalist or even just economic principles. I think an example of this was when Hillary Clinton was running and in one of her speeches she was saying, "Will breaking up the banks end racism? Will it end transphobia?" To which the crowd gave a resounding no. He later says, I still think it's important to highlight because this, liberals using identity politics, is a very important problem that is used to completely turn the working class off of economic issues. Now, before I begin, I should point out that I actually agree with a large part of the point that Xexizy is making here. Liberal identity politics are used to turn the working class off of economic issues, and this is a mistake. However, using this as an argument against idpol, I believe, is misguided. Xexizy seems to be making the argument that identity politics have been co-opted by reactionaries and used for reactionary ends to such an extent that it has become more of a burden than a benefit to the left, and should therefore be discarded, and replaced with a more class-centered movement which will, once enacted, eventually abolish systemic racism and sexism altogether. He makes this clear here, quote, as these things go against people's interests, and as there is no longer anything to keep them actively in place, these structures, institutional racism, sexism, etc., will be immediately dismantled. Now, not only do I disagree with this, but I think it shows a lack of understanding how reaction has worked throughout history. In his book, The Reactionary Mind, Corey Robin explains how the left tries to dismantle hierarchy, and because each hierarchy is different at each given time, each leftist attempt to undercut it must be different too. This means that reactionaries, who try to maintain hierarchy, must adapt and change in turn to respond to each specific leftist movement. In this way, the right wing will mirror or borrow from the left. As a result of this, reactionaries have always been willing to use nominally left-wing things to maintain social and political hierarchies. A good example would be the conservative leader Otto von Bismarck, who was the first major European leader to nationalize healthcare. Nationalization, the process of taking something in the private sphere and putting it under direct control of the state, is generally considered left-wing, yet one of its first mass implementations was done by one of European history's greatest conservatives. Bismarck did this to undermine the emerging socialist, social democratic party's popularity and prevent another Paris Commune. Does the fact that the right wing used a left-wing thing, nationalization, as a tool to undermine the left and maintain hierarchy, mean the left shouldn't be in favor of nationalization? No. For a more modern example, I live in the United States, and where I'm from, many police officers are able to get away with crimes for which they are clearly guilty. One of the things that allows them to do this is police unions. When a department wants to fire someone, the police union can put pressure on the department to keep the cop instead. This is a leftist thing, unions, being used to preserve a reactionary thing, the police. Would Xexizy use the fact that unions have been co-opted by the right to maintain police control as an argument against unions? No. There are also other ways that the right borrows from the left. For example, I think we, as leftists, can agree that the left tends to win at history. Over time, things tend to be less hierarchical. From the state, which went from absolute monarchist to constitutional monarchist to republic, from the economy, which went from slavery to feudalism to capitalism, to racism, which went from slavery to Jim Crow to the modern prison-industrial complex, to gender relations, which went from women not being able to vote to women not being able to get abortions, etc. As time goes on, the powers that be, the state, class, institutional racism and sexism, have had to make serious concessions to the left. That means that reactionaries, who wish to maintain hierarchies, exist in a world largely created from power's concession to the left, and, existing in that world, must make use of the tools available to them. This is why reactionary liberals use their version of identity politics to maintain hierarchies. Reactionary liberals, along with the general population, now concede, some cynically, some sincerely, that most minorities are deserving of human rights, and thus any argument they make is going to have to include that. If this were a different time period, reactionaries would be using a different tool. The fact that reactionary liberals use identity politics to maintain hierarchies doesn't make identity politics bad, it makes reactionary liberals bad. Identity politics may now seem liberal and reactionary, but their origin was radical. The term identity politics was first used by the Combahee River Collective, a radical Marxist organization, with the coiner of the term identity politics, Barbara Smith, being a lifetime socialist who said her movement incorporated class consciousness. Identity politics was largely radical, but over time, as society has progressed, these values became more common, and now these values are more associated with liberals than radicals. This is true of other liberatory movements throughout history. There was once a time where the idea of racial and sexual equality was considered so extreme and radical that only extremists and radicals believed in it. The man who founded the NAACP and arguably the civil rights movement, W.E.B. Du Bois, was a pro-Soviet Union self-identified communist. The man who organized the March on Washington, called the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, where Martin Luther King Jr. gave his famous I Have a Dream speech, was socialist organizer A. Philip Randolph. One of the earliest gay rights organizations in American history, the Madison Society, was explicitly Marxist. Now the values of anti-racism and tolerance have grown so ubiquitous in woke culture, at least on the face of it, that now even moderates accept them, and most of the people who now speak loudly about these issues are now centrist liberals. To stop talking about these issues, or as Xexizy does, to say that we should focus less on them and more on capitalism, is to alienate a great deal of our potential supporters. Think of it this way. Let's say you're a black person living in systemic poverty and being profiled by police on a daily basis. You, like most people, don't spend too much time thinking about dialectical materialism. Who is going to be more appealing to you? Moderates who constantly talk about the issues facing you, who live near you, whose members and activists look like you and share your experiences? Or radicals insisting that abolishing capitalism will end their racism problems because something Hegel? Talking about and moving for progress on racial issues is not just important for the people who are affected by these things, it is literally necessary for the future of our movement. Many of history's greatest Marxists, James Connolly, Fred Hampton, Nelson Mandela, W.E.B. Du Bois, were first introduced to Marxism not through class, but through the problems facing their racial identities. If you want to convince people of color, women, and LGBT people, who historically have been the majority of our movement, to join our movement, instead of telling them that class will take care of it, you should explain to them the history of their liberatory movements, how radicals were the first to push for them, and that centrist liberalism is ill-equipped to solve their problems. Now, maybe Xexizy agrees with all this. He doesn't really make it clear in his videos, and I don't want to misrepresent him here, but I think it's very clear to say that simply writing identity politics off is simply wrong. To conclude, because many reactionaries' tools have some of their origins in leftism, from nationalization to police unions to identity politics, etc., to stop using our own tools when reactionaries co-opt them would be to concede away much of our history, and by extension our movement. And while identity politics may now be seen as illiberal and used as a tool of reaction, its origins and potential future are radical, and I believe they have a role to play in our future. Thank you for watching.